Okay. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on the different pathways for the use and distribution of the PPB wheat and oat materials with which you have been working. My name is Christy Ceallaigh-Bisson. My pronouns are they and him, and I am a policy analyst with SeedChange, and I will be explaining the regulatory and economic considerations that may figure into what you decide to do with the PPB wheat and oat material. First, I would like to mention that I am located in Mi'kma'ki in so-called Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia, on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people, with whom I am in a treaty relationship through the 1726 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. I mention this to share my intention for my work to act in solidarity and reciprocity with the Indigenous peoples to Turtle Island, and I hope we can work together and to end ongoing structures of colonialism through our seed work towards a decolonial future of solidarity, respect for differences, and healthy ecosystems. Second, just a brief note on translation. As you can see and hear, we have made accommodations for this presentation to be available in English and French. Unfortunately, not all the materials in today's presentation will be provided in French. If you have any questions or require any clarifications throughout this presentation, please do not hesitate to ask us or contact me by email at a later time. I'm also happy to take questions in French during the discussion period following this presentation. So in today's presentation, we will be going over 5 topics and have some time for discussion. First, I will talk about how the PPB material from this program fits within the formal Canadian seed and grade system. Second, we will be hearing from 2 PPB participants, and they would have agreed to share their stories about distributing the PPB materials to local consumers and processors. Options that are immediately available to PPB participants without having to go through variety registration. Third, I will be going over the regulatory constraints on the PPB material for selling to a licensed grain elevator and what is required to make it eligible for large-scale commercial grain distribution. Fourth, I will explain the process of variety registration to make it eligible for distribution as common wheat and oat seed. Here, I will also be going over the cost estimates of variety registration that I have prepared. And here I will be assisted by Catherine Stanley in describing how the University of Manitoba can assist in preparing a variety for registration. Fifth, I will briefly describe what is involved in seed certification and performance testing if you are interested in broad-scale distribution of the PPB material as seed by variety name. And we will wrap up this presentation with some time for discussion and questions. So our intention is that this presentation gives you a better understanding of what options are available for the PPB material, direct distribution opportunities, what variety registration involves and what it costs, what you can do with the PPB material once it is registered as a variety, and we would love to hear any feedback on how farmers can best be supported to register a variety. So please note that all of the information that I will be presenting on is available in the Participatory Plant Breeding for Wheat and Oats in Canada guide that was circulated for today's Farm Club meeting. There is a lot of material I'll be covering, so don't worry if you miss something. But before we dig in, I would like to know a little bit about more about where folks are at in terms of their familiarity on the subject. So for this, we have prepared a brief poll, which should be available in the chats momentarily, if not right now. So just take a moment to fill that out to give us a little sense of where you're at. So farmers in this program have been struggling with the question of how to distribute their PPB wheat and oats, because it's unregistered material, which means that it is not permitted by the seeds regulations and the Canada Grains Act to be sold as seed or as grain through a licensed elevator. This has so far meant that participants effectively only have one pathway for distribution, which is direct distribution. If participants want to distribute their PPB material as grain to direct markets, the PPB material does not need to qualify as a variety, nor does it need to go through variety registration. So in this presentation, we're essentially going to cover two broad pathways: an unregistered pathway of direct distribution and a registered pathway of seed and elevator grain distribution. Farmers in the PPB program can continue to distribute grain directly and locally without any regulatory restrictions beyond standard food safety laws. However, when farmers want to distribute the material as grain through the Canadian grain system or as seed, then the PPB material needs to be registered as a variety. To explain this second broad pathway that goes through variety registration, it is first important to explain how the PPB material fits into Canada's formal seed and grain system in ways that are different from conventional varieties that are typically registered. Now, the way we at SeedChange understand our seed system is that Indigenous peoples and farmers are the original plant breeders who were regulated by a community-based ethos of stewardship rather than a national regulatory apparatus. Yet, the crop diversity that all people benefit from today is a result of their seed stewardship and their deep knowledge of their land and food. While many farmers all over the world continue to adapt and develop varieties for their own farms, plant breeding has become increasingly institutionalized, and seed distribution has become specialized through market-based production over the past century. This means that most farmers are no longer engaged in the process of plant breeding. As you all know, the PPB wheat and oat program differs in several important ways from institutional and corporate breeding practices that are common in the Canadian seed system. First, participants have been engaged in selecting the parental lines for crosses. Second, parental lines have used combination of registered varieties, unregistered heritage varieties, and pre-variety germplasm. Third, all selections are being done by farmers on certified organic or ecologically managed farms. And material is being selected to perform in those conditions. And finally, participants have the option of bringing the PPB material through variety registration to be distributed as seed or to grain elevators, or they can maintain it as unregistered variety to consume directly or distribute to local consumers and processors. The wheat or oat material for the PPB program was bred by either the University of Manitoba or Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. In both cases, technicians made crosses from parental lines with desirable traits. For example, one of the wheat populations was a cross of AC Cadillac and Carberry wheat. This cross was made because some farmers wanted wheat that had good yield, resistance to fusarium, and good resistance to lodging. Another important clarification to make here: we have been using the terms population, evolutionary population, or heterogeneous population to describe the PPB materials that farmers have been working with. This means that there is a fair degree of genetic diversity between individuals within the seed population, relative to genetically narrow conventional varieties. This means that PPB materials are different to conventional varieties. Fortunately, though, we've learned that Canada's seed regulations contain a very broad definition of variety, which can include evolutionary populations that are selected to meet the basic criteria to be considered a variety. And that definition of a variety is provided in the regulations as follows. You can see it on the slide here. An assemblage of cultivated plants, hybrids constituted by controlled cross-pollination that are distinguished by common morphological, physiological, cytological, chemical, or other characteristics, and retain their distinguishing characteristics when reproduced. This broad definition of variety means that PPB wheat and oat materials can be registered as a variety, which opens up several pathways for PPB materials beyond direct use and distribution. But before we dive deeper into variety registration, there is a lot that can be done immediately with PPB wheat and oat materials through direct distribution. Many farmers participating in this program are already testing out options, such as selling at farmers markets, community-supported agriculture programs, on-farm milling, selling to local bakeries, and selling to local restaurants. Unfortunately, we have two farmers on the call today who can explain to us how they have been using the PPB materials. So first, we'd love to hear from Jim Gryce Alvarado of Cedar Farms. If you don't mind sharing with us a little bit about your program.
Oh, I'll be quick. Thank you very much, and apologize for the photo there. That's actually a patch right at the edge of a different field. Anyway, we have the Manitoba cross paired with with Marquis, the heritage variety, and we're growing them in concert. And as I mentioned before, we offered them for the first time this year to our CSA members, and they get a variety of grains, and they're able to select between Marquis and Manitoba and the Manitoba PPB cross this year. And if they didn't choose, then we just gave them one or the other. So the way our system works, you sign up at the beginning of the year. We have about 200 or so members, most of them from Vancouver, but scattered around. Some up to Sunshine Coast and for elsewhere in BC. And so they pay their share. It's like a vegetable box program, only once a year. And then they get from there a selection of grains, of which the hard red spring is only one. We also have soft white spring and fall rye, and then oats, which are a bit of our specialty, Hullis oats. And this year, the uptake was very good on the cross, partly because we have been issuing updates to all of our members and interested friends on the two types that we've been growing. And they've been quite interested in the fact that we obtained our first seed from Marquis, from Plant Gene Resources in Saskatoon. And we also shared the story of the modern way of breeding, as we called it, with the PPB variety. And people are very delighted to hear the contrast between those two. And they're very anxious to some of them, expert bakers, to try the difference between the two for their baking qualities and so on. In terms of the future goal, I think we'll try and keep both of those hard red springs going. We've tried a bunch of others, but we find the Manitoba PPB grew really well here, and so we're quite encouraged. Where that goes in future, I'm not sure. I don't think there aren't very many farms around here that actually grow, obviously, in forage country. So I don't know what sort of uptake there will be for that, but we're certainly open to the idea of sharing it with others in the area, and I'm free to do so, provided people understand that it's not a registered variety and it's not to be inserted into the system. So if there are any questions, feel free. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to you, Christy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. And we also have another farmer, Ward Middleton from Midmore Farms, who can share us a little bit about how he's been working with the PPB material.
Hi there. Can you hear me well enough?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. I just never trust my audio on my aging computer. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about my experience with farm direct marketing that actually has evolved parallel to my participation in the PPB program. I believe I've finished my wheat selections by 2016, I think it was actually. And I was I was a reluctant volunteer, thinking, wow, I like the concept of what's going on here, and I should volunteer and be contribute my time and my selection efforts to what I thought was a good cause. But I was a little bit of a slow to realize how it could impact our farm directly. So at the same time that I was doing those selections, I had cultivated a relationship with a local baker. We are located only about 45 minutes north of Edmonton, or 30 minutes north of Edmonton, 45 minutes from this bakery. And this bakery was seeking to have a supply of wheat and rye from somebody locally who would be able to deliver to them in small quantities, like a pickup truckload at a time. And this baker was also very passionate about having some of this diversity. And he was getting me to do things like, oh, he'd show up with a handful of purple colored wheat that he just wants for ornamental purposes. Ward, can you multiply this and grow it for me? And we're just, years later, just at that point where we're supplying that. And he was also getting us to grow, mix a bunch of varieties together, some of them being heritage varieties, some of them being modern varieties, to try to get more diversity. And it was actually at in the discussion through one of these club sessions where Dr. Martinez pointed out that really what we had been working with, that was at year 6 by the time we finished the PPB selections on our farm, one of those varieties would actually still have more genetic variability than mixing a bunch of registered cultivars together. And so in working with the baker, we've now got some of this seed supply back from the program and have just started multiplying it out, and have enough from this year that we're hoping to do some taste testing on it. I still actually don't even know what the parentage or the cross was for this, but I always quote the sexy name is BL39A-N-15-WM, but it's performed quite well. And the interesting thing that I found was, at the same time as we were delivering to the bakery and had always a bin of, we always grew the variety called Park Wheat, Hard Red Spring, because it was the oldest registered variety that I could still buy through the certified seed system, and was supplying that direct to the baker. We decided to advertise locally just on Kijiji and Facebook Marketplace, and had people willing to come to our farm, or we would do a milk run through the city, dropping off bags of wheat to people who were milling their own grain. And I was astounded by the uptake. We've been doing this now for 2 years, and we've gotten to the point where we're on track this year for 75% of our gross revenue for our farm will come from farm direct sales. Now, not all of that is necessarily wheat and rye, but it's definitely augmented our farm direct sales, where there's not a grain company or a grain broker or the regular seed distribution or grain distribution system or marketing system playing a role in our revenue stream. So the interesting thing was, because we had either PPB trials going on or our multiplication of this variety that we're going to choose to replace the park wheat for our local sales that came from the PPB program, the fact that I had this growing in the garden, I would share with customers as they would come to our farm and say, hey, you got a minute, come for a walk. And it's only 100 meters over to my garden. And they would see the variety growing there. And like Jim said, people love that story about how the PPB program was different than the conventional plant breeding program. And then also, sharing with them that legally I can't sell this grain if I develop this and multiply it to a point where I can provide it for them. I can't legally sell it into the commercial system, but I can still legally sell it to them directly. And there is almost a conspiratorial glee with my customer base at the prospect of getting some of this grain. So I've even had some of those people so eager, even though they were in my garden and saw that I have 1/10 of an acre of this stuff growing, and they're already calling saying, can I get some of that wheat? No, please, could you just wait a little bit more till I get a bit more seed? Thank you, I appreciate your eagerness, but I definitely will, be comfortable that we are a small enough grain farm that I think that all of my wheat supply that I grow will become either this variety, or, you know, if there's something that's better that comes through the PPV program than what I had done my selections here, then I'll pursue with that. The one thing that I do like about this is that it's only at year 6 out of 10 in its development and selection process. And I've chosen to start to work with that now, even though as I grow it in my plot, I still see a lot of variability. I firmly believe that that is one of the things that's going to provide us with a level of insurance against severe weather events that are coming with climate change. And people also love that story because it's choosing something with more genetic variability intentionally, so that it might be a little bit more leaning towards a land race than an actual, you know, tight cultivar. Whether or not it pans out like that, for now, it's definitely feeding well into the marketing strategy. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim and Ward. Wow, that's fantastic to hear. So as they've shown, it is definitely possible to continue saving, replanting, and distributing the material through direct channels. However, if a farmer is interested in distributing the PPB material as grain through the formal grain system, then that will bring us into our second set of pathways requiring variety registration. Now, in Canada, commercial grain distribution involves selling grain to a licensed elevator. In Western Canada, licensed elevators cannot accept unregistered varieties of wheat and oats. In Eastern Canada, some elevators are allowed to accept unregistered varieties of wheat and oats. However, they are only permitted to give a sample grade to it for it, which is the lowest available for the wheat class or for milling oats. New legislation introduced to ratify the new trade agreement with the United States and Mexico requires that everyone delivering grain to an elevator must sign a declaration of eligibility, declaration of eligibility form, stating that the grain is of a registered variety. This legislation has also given licensed elevators the power to reject unregistered varieties if they don't want to take it. Therefore, farmers are effectively required to have the PPB material registered before it's possible to distribute through the formal grain system. Now, if participants want to distribute their PPB material as seed to other farmers or as grain through the grain elevator system, the material has to qualify as a variety and has to go through Canada's variety registration system. Fortunately, we have an experienced plant breeder on the call, Dr. Jennifer Mitchell-Fetch, who has kindly agreed to fill in any important information that I miss and to answer any questions that require a breeder's specialized knowledge and experience. And as some of you know, Jennifer has worked to develop much of the oat material for this program, and she and her successor, Kirby Nelson, has been including some of those materials in the AFC trials for their own oat breeding program. So Jennifer, feel free to interrupt me at any time if there is anything you would like to add. In Canada, in order for most major agricultural grain crops, including wheat and oats, to be distributed as seed, they must be registered. Successfully registering a variety involves undergoing a public process of peer review evaluation to ensure that said variety performs as well or better than other registered varieties. These registrations are in place because the market structure of seed and grain distribution in Canada, which requires public measures to prevent fraud, protect the public interest, and preserve the quality of seed in Canada. We feel that this process is important, but it can be relatively lengthy and costly for farmers. But we think that with some cooperation between program partners, we can get a PPB materials registered, allowing farmers to distribute it through the formal seed system. So not all grain crops require variety registration to distribute a new variety of seed. In fact, the seeds regulations contain a tiered framework of regulations that apply certain provisions to certain crops. All Schedule 3 crops require variety registration and seed certification to be distributed by variety name. However, Schedule 3 is divided into 3 parts with different requirements for variety registration. Schedule 3 Part 1 requires full variety registration, and this entails the variety to have merit, which I'll be explaining a little bit more about in a moment. It requires a recommending committee to set up the testing protocol and provide a letter of recommendation for variety registration. And as you can see in this table, wheat and oats sold for grain production are considered Schedule 3 Part 1 crop types. This means that they require a full process of variety registration involving a recommending committee. Now, the entry point for variety registration is the Regional Recommending Committee, or RC for short. The RCs are organized regionally by crop kind, organized regionally and by crop kind. So farmers will need to identify the appropriate one to work. All of the different RCs for wheat and oats are listed on this table. RCs are a group of volunteer experts that meet to assess the trial data from pre-registration trials for merit testing and determine a cultivar's eligibility for registration. They are also responsible for approving trial and data analysis procedures and voting on whether to recommend a variety for registration. To successfully register a new wheat or oat variety, participants will need to obtain a letter of recommendation from the appropriate RC in their region. Potential registrants will therefore need to work with an RC to establish a plan for the coordination of pre-registration trials. Pre-registration trials are required for the registration of new varieties of wheat and oat. The trials produce test data for merit evaluation by the RC. Most RCs across Canada sponsor co-op trials themselves. Other provinces like Quebec work with crop development institutions like the Centre de Recherche Ceallaigh or CERAM to conduct test data trials. These committees and institutions host co-op trials for fees ranging from free to $1,900. Participants can also pay unsponsored private trials on a fee-for-service basis, which we estimate can cost up to $15,500 to produce the full package of trial data required by an RC. Now, each RC establishes the requirements and procedures for pre-registration trials. This involves determining how many trial sites, trial site years, and minimum program years of data that are required for consideration as a new variety by an RC. Trial site locations are the number of different places where trials take place within a region. Trial site years is the number of trial plots planted to be grown and harvested over the duration of a season. Many trial site years can take place at the same time in different trial plots and in different trial site locations. And minimum program years is the shortest duration permitted for all trial site years to take place. So RCs will ask you to provide about 2 to 3 kilograms of trial seed to be used in sponsored pre-registration trials. It is recommended to send breeder seed to the RC to ensure the seed is stable enough to pass merit testing, but it's not required. As long as the seed submitted for testing is distinguishable and stable, it will qualify as an eligible variety. A CSGA recognized breeder can help participants produce seed that meets these standards. Participants have the option of having their seed officially certified by an authorized seed crop inspection service, an ACIS. But seed produced by a certified CSGA, by a CSGA recognized breeder automatically qualifies as breeder seed for the purposes of pre-registration trials and variety registration. So the data from pre-registration trials are used to determine if the new variety has merit to be considered for recommendation for registration. The registrant submits the pre-registration trial data for the potential new variety along with data from checked varieties, which are already registered varieties that are similar to the one entered for merit testing. The data is distributed to 3 evaluation teams. One team focuses on agronomic performance, one team focuses on pest resistance, and one team focuses on end-use quality. These teams meet to evaluate the trial data and report on whether a variety has merit for the team's area of analysis. A variety is not required to demonstrate merit for all areas in order to be recommended for variety registration, but it helps make a case for its recommendation. RC members meet once a year to reflect on the results of merit testing. They discuss each potential new variety and then vote on whether or not to recommend the variety for registration. After the RC has received the test data, participants can request a recommendation from the RC for variety registration. If an applicant has requested national registration, then other RCs can review the variety's test data and decide if it should be registered in their region. If a region's RC takes issue with the recommendation of a variety in their region, let's say for reasons of pest vulnerability, then they can request it as not registered for their region. And applicants can request to have variety registration limited to a particular region that they want. Registered wheat and oat varieties can only be produced and distributed in regions where the variety is approved. So here I have conducted a survey of the service costs involved in completion of variety registration. And I estimate that it could cost between $912 and $1,900 to register a variety through sponsored program. This range depends on what crop you're looking to register and what region you are in. Oat varieties, for instance, tend to be less expensive than wheat varieties because there is not as many end-use testing requirements. Regional RCs, such as those in Atlantic Canada or in the prairies, operate their own pre-registration trial programs, which are either free or tend to be less costly. The cost range, however, depends on availability of spots in a sponsored trial. If there are no spots available, you may be asked to provide data from a fee-for-service lab following the RC-determined trial protocol. And this fee-for-service program can cost an estimated $15,500 to produce all the required trial site use. Thankfully, the University of Manitoba has offered to help with some of the labor costs involved in preparing a variety for registration. And they have offered to assist with gathering some data to get varieties eligible for pre-registration trials and to bulk up the seed for the trials themselves. Catherine Stanley of the University of Manitoba can provide us a bit more detail. Catherine, if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit.
Hi, Christy, did you get my, oh, perfect, there we go. Nice to see you all. I have to warn you in advance, I'm in the shop today because our offices are incredibly busy. So fingers are crossed that our fans or air compressor don't go off. So I won't take up too much of your time. But like Christy said, one of the things that we've been doing already and part of our involvement with the participatory plant breeding program are replicated trials. And so in this picture, this is just an example. I'm sure a lot of you have seen experiments like this before, but this is just an example of what a variety experiment looks like on a research farm. So each of those rectangular areas is an individual variety or an individual plot. And typically these are replicated 3 or 4 times in the area. And that allows us to do statistical analysis on the yield and other quality indicators to determine whether or not the lines that we're testing are meeting, whether it's PPB or other already registered lines, if they're being able to grow under organic conditions, or they're meeting the quality standards for registration. So in some of our discussions with the group at Bauta, we are proposing to continue some of the replicated experiments with the PPB lines into next year for those of farmers who are interested in participating. We would take the lines that you have all selected and grow them in our locations here in Manitoba and potentially at other sites, but that's dependent on a few other factors, but for sure in Manitoba. And then what we would do to kind of help those of you interested in engaging in the variety registration process is we would evaluate the lines that are up some of the best performing lines. So those would have to be at equal or better performance than a Czech variety. So in that, we would be discussing with plant breeders kind of what we're needing to look for. So different agronomic and protein or different quality data like beta-glucan for oats. And that would then help you make your decisions if you're interested in going forward with this registration process from there. And then the seed or the grain that we've harvested from these small plots typically ends up producing about 2 to 3 kilograms of grain, which we could then provide back to you to enter into the pre-registration or the variety experiments more on the registration level. So some of those preliminary first steps we could help out with, and then you could take it from there if you're interested. So we just started talking about this. So I'm sure some of you might have some questions, or Christy, if there's anything that you want me to clarify, but I will just leave that a little bit for there, just as a brief explanation of what we can do on our end to help you in your journey if you want to register your lines.
Thank you, Catherine. So we'll have an opportunity to have discussion and questions following this presentation. There's just a few slides left and then we can get to chatting. But yeah, thanks again, Catherine. So once you're kind of at this stage, once you've gone through variety registration, and it says register, the participants can distribute the PPB material as common seed. Common seed is produced from registered varieties and distributed as seed without a variety name or grade. A point of clarification that's necessary is here is that there are 2 ways in which common seed is used in the Canadian seed system. Common seed can also refer to the lowest grade that can be given to certified seed in accordance with the standards detailed in the seeds regulations grades tables. However, in this presentation and in the pathways guide, this is not the sense of the word that we are referring to. Instead, common seed, as we use the term, cannot be given a certified seed grade, labeled or tagged, or advertised as a variety. It can only be advertised and sold as a bag or bulk container of wheat or oat seed with no variety name or description. If a participant wants to label the PPB seed with a tag, the variety must be grown by a pedigree seed grower in accordance with the procedures required for certified seed. And certified seed is produced from registered variety, and it's one that is inspected by a CSGA authorized agency, which can then be distributed as seed by the variety name. And then briefly on that, if you would like to distribute the PPB material by variety name, then you will need to have it certified by an authorized seed crop inspection service, an ACIS. These service agencies are listed by the CSGA. I don't get too much into this in this presentation or in the pathways guide. However, I encourage you to contact and follow up with the CSGA to find out more information about what's involved. However, I have estimated that you can expect the cost starting at $300 per year per acre for 1 acre, which increases by acre by a factor of increases by acre at a rate of $1.10 per acre. There's also a non-mandatory option of having the seed performance tested. This is a series of tests done for performance indicators for production in different regions relative to commercially available varieties. This testing is done mostly for marketing purposes to help farmers know what varieties are appropriate for their needs and in their region. And the cost for this can range anywhere from it being free in places like Manitoba to $1,500 per variety, depending on where you're located. So certified seed production is the final pathway discussed in this presentation and in the guide. With that, this concludes my presentation. I would like to hear from you. I would love to know what questions you have about these different pathways. I would also like to know any feedback on the clarity of the presentation and guide. Specifically, I'm interested in hearing your perspectives on what aspects of variety registration are most challenging and what kinds of supports farmers could benefit from to support their ability to register a new variety. And following up on the poll that we conducted a little earlier in the presentation, we will now be sharing another poll in the chat to understand your familiarity with the pathways available for the use of the PPV materials. And again, we're really grateful for your feedback. So we want to learn from farmers on how helpful this guide has been. We're hoping to have continued discussions, either one-on-one or with small farmer groups, those who are looking to register their varieties and participate in a couple meetings over the course of next year to share what is working well in the registration process and what is more challenging and what additional types of support would have been helpful in general.